Hello all, my name is Kyle Ussery. I'm the bassist and synthesizer player in Foggy Mountain Spaceship. Today I'm going to be talking about the BanjoSynth Model 1, also known as the BS1. I created this instrument in 2024 as a means to play left-hand bass and right-hand chords and leads in a string instrument type format. And since it's mainly designed for Foggy Mountain Spaceship, I wanted it to look like a banjo. I'm going to give a broad overview of its features and then dive into each aspect of the instrument in more detail. I'll also demo some of my favorite sounds that I've come up with so far. All of this will be labeled with chapter markers, so skip ahead as needed. So at its core, the BanjoSynth is a MIDI controller. It doesn't have any sounds built in. They all come from a computer or external module of some sort. I use Apple's MainStage paired with the MacBook for my sounds. It's built into the body of an 11-inch banjo head with a custom detachable neck. It features two 25-key MIDI controllers with the left keyboard flipped upside down. It also has a 3-knob MIDI parameter controller I use for controlling things like cutoff, delay, and other effects. It has a customizable 12-button controller on the headstock, and also a USB master volume knob. So let's talk about the keyboards. The two keyboards are Korg Nano keys. They are velocity sensitive and both have octave control, pitch bend, and modulation. In my case, I use the different octaves for different sounds. So for example, the left keyboard, I typically pitch down 1 octave, and I have reserved that range for bass sounds. And the right keyboard is typically pitched up 1 octave, which I then use for chords or lead sounds. The left keyboard is flipped upside down so I can hold it and play it more like a string instrument, otherwise it would be quite awkward to play. In fact, this is one of the main differentiators between this instrument and a more traditional keytar. The keytar isn't very ergonomic to play the keys with both hands, especially for long periods of time. And since the primary objective of this thing was to be able to play left-hand bass and right-hand keys, I needed to make it comfortable and easy to do so. The only downside is that on the left hand, you aren't really able to use your thumb to play any keys. So let's talk about the other controllers. It's got a 3-knob MIDI parameter controller made by a company called MIDI Maker. I use it for controlling things like effects and cutoff frequencies on synthesizer sounds. It also has a USB volume knob that controls the master volume of the computer. On the headstock, it has a 12-button device built by a company called Adafruit, and it's called the Macropad. This device can be programmed however you like using Python code. I used ChatGPT to help me program it, and I currently have it programmed like the E, A, and D strings of a bass guitar. It isn't touch sensitive, but there are workarounds like using cutoffs and resonance adjustments to soften the tones. All of these devices are USB and feed into this 4-input USB hub. I actually have a USB coupler plugged into one of the inputs to buy me 1 extra input, totaling 5. So far, the coupler seems to be working just fine in terms of power and data. The USB hub then sends out a 15-foot USB-C cable, which both powers and sends data from the instrument to the computer. So let's talk a little bit about software. If you're using a computer, you need to use some kind of sound generating software. There, of course, are tons of different ones like Ableton Live, Logic, etc. In my case, I use Apple MainStage for my live performances. For the way I'm using it, MainStage works really well. It's designed basically to be a live keyboard sound engine. It doesn't really have the ability to multi-track record, but I don't need it to do that when I'm playing it live. It also has the ability to customize the layout of the software and all the sounds in a million different ways. As I mentioned before, I separate the sounds of the instrument using the different octaves of the keyboards. Here's an image of how I do that on one of my sounds. I could probably dedicate a whole video to Apple's MainStage, so I won't get into the details too exhaustively here. So let's talk a little bit about the banjo itself. I bought this banjo on eBay. It was broken, had a few issues with the neck, but that didn't really matter to me because I was going to replace it anyways. The happy accident of this whole thing being built into a banjo is the fact that the banjo body provides a perfect hollow chamber to house all of the electronics. Additionally, the head is quite easy to poke holes in for knobs and things like that. On the original prototype of this instrument, I used one of my old bluegrass banjos, which was super heavy, and I didn't want to really mess up the head by poking holes in it and things like that. So once I made the real thing, I wanted it to be lighter and have the ability to break down small for traveling. So as you can see here, instead of using a traditional resonator on the back, I just use a flat, thin piece of plywood that attaches with Velcro. It's really easy to pop this off, and so far the Velcro seems to be holding fine. The threaded rod runs through the heel of the neck, and it makes it relatively easy to undo the two nuts and detach the neck. The nut on the heel of the neck also worked out really well as a good central spot to attach the strap. On the other side of the strap, I just use a carabiner around one of the tension rods. One of the other aspects of this I realized once I started playing it was that when I was holding it flat against my body, it was actually quite hard to see the keys, so I realized I needed to angle it upward and outward a little bit so I could see the keys easier without bending my neck too hard. So the way I did this was I used a piece of pick-apart foam and kind of made it into a wedge shape, and then covered it in gaff tape and Velcro, and I just Velcro it onto the back. It's a little janky, but it works. If anybody's got any good ideas of a better way to do this, please let me know. So let's talk a little bit about amplification. There's a lot of different ways you could do this, but I choose to do it in the most simple way possible when I bring it out live. I run out of the headphones output of the laptop to a stereo 1/4-inch cable into a keyboard amp or a stereo DI box, which then is able to send to the house PA system. This generally provides a strong, clean signal for me, and I haven't had any complaints about that yet. You could use an audio interface and have more options of outputs and things like that. For example, you could send the bass as one channel and the lead sounds as another, but in general I've found that to prove a little too complicated, and a stereo signal usually works just fine. So what are my takeaways from this? I've been having tons of fun with this instrument. It's definitely opened some new sonic doors for the band and enables to maximize our trio's sound. The other cool thing is that I've found that the limitations of playability, particularly in the left hand, actually makes me write in a different way than I would at the piano, for example, and I come up with things that I probably wouldn't have otherwise. It's also quite fun to stand and play this, and people really get a kick out of it live. I definitely have some more ideas for the next version of it. I've thought about maybe a double neck, like a bass guitar and this, or perhaps more buttons and knobs on the body. We'll see how it goes. But for now, this is really taking me where I want to go with it. I know there's probably a lot of things I overlooked in this video, so I'll do my best to field any questions in the comments. So now I'm going to demo some of the sounds that I've come up with using the BS1 and MainStage. I really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you around.